The steady autumn rain tapped against the tall windows of the grand Victorian mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, as antique dealer Catherine Walsh worked with meticulous care through the belongings of the Peaton estate. The once powerful family had occupied this imposing residence overlooking the Atlantic for nearly a century. But with the death of the last heir, everything within its walls was destined for auction to satisfy long-standing debts and heavy taxes. Catherine, an expert in rare photographs and historical documents, had been summoned to evaluate what promised to be a vast and intriguing collection of family memorabilia. In the oak-paneled library, she uncovered dozens of photograph albums, each meticulously arranged and labeled in graceful handwriting that spoke to generations of wealth and order. Among them, one volume immediately drew her eye, a burgundy leather album, reinforced with brass corners, its title etched with the words, "The Peaton Family War Years, 1914 to 1920. As she lifted its weighty cover, the faint perfume of aged paper and preserved memory drifted upward, immersing her in a world long past. The pages unfolded a record of privilege during the turbulent years of World War I, filled with images of glittering garden parties, elaborate charity gatherings, and somber yet dignified family portraits. On the 12th page, Catherine's hand lingered as her gaze locked upon a particularly striking portrait dated Christmas 1917. The composition captured the Peatons, gathered in their opulent drawing room, where expensive furnishings and ornate holiday decorations formed a tableau of prosperity. Charles Peaton stood tall in his tailored suit behind the chair of his wife Eleanor, while their 3 children posed carefully around them, dressed in festive attire that underscored the family's refinement. Yet despite the wealth of details, it was Eleanor Peaton who commanded the portrait. Regal in her bearing, she sat poised in a carved chair, her elegant black velvet gown adorned with intricate beadwork that shimmered softly under the camera's flash. Her dark hair was swept into the fashionable Gibson girl style, and her hands were gloved in immaculate white, the very image of aristocratic composure. Still, one subtle peculiarity disturbed the harmony of the scene. Eleanor's right hand rested naturally on the chair's arm, but her left appeared unnaturally posed. The glove stretched slightly thicker, as though concealing some hidden object. The detail gnawed at Catherine's curiosity. 3 days later, that curiosity led her to the conservation laboratory of the Newport Historical Society, where she conferred with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading specialist in photographic analysis. The lab, a realm of carefully controlled light and advanced instruments, was designed for the delicate work of preserving history without erasing its secrets. Adjusting the precise lamps over the century-old portrait, Dr. Rodriguez studied the image intently and remarked with a quiet reverence that the photograph was more than just a family portrait. It was a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The Peaton family held a position of high esteem in Newport society during this era, their influence rooted in both wealth and reputation. Charles Peaton had amassed a fortune through shipping and steel industries that thrived during the war years, while Eleanor was celebrated for her tireless charitable work, organizing relief efforts and commanding admiration as one of the city's most elegant hostesses. Yet despite their outward perfection, something about the Christmas 1917 portrait unsettled Catherine. She leaned closer, tapping the image of Eleanor's left hand. There's something unnatural here. The way it's posed, the way the glove sits, it doesn't look right. Dr. Rodriguez bent over the photograph, adjusting the magnification lens. Her expression grew intent. You're right. There's tension in her fingers, as if she's forcing that position. And this glove, yes, it's bulkier than the other, almost as though she's concealing something. Switching to a higher contrast lens, she pointed to faint distortions in the fabric. See here near the wrist. The fabric looks stretched unnaturally. and noticed the shadows. They don't align with what you'd expect from a relaxed hand. Moving to her computer, she carefully scanned the photograph at high resolution and began running digital enhancement techniques. Sometimes we can reveal things that weren't visible to the naked eye or to the camera of the time. Slowly, the enhanced image sharpened on the monitor. Catherine's breath caught as the screen revealed details that the century-old print had hidden. Beneath the pristine white glove was the faint but unmistakable outline of heavy bandaging, the fabric straining against the bulk. Even more chilling, faint stains, subtle, almost imperceptible in the original, emerged beneath the digital filters. Catherine, Dr. Rodriguez, whispered, her voice weighted with unease. She was hiding an injury. Catherine stared at the monitor, her mind racing. But why would she go to such lengths in a family portrait? What kind of injury would need that level of concealment? Determined to find answers, Catherine spent the next week combing through archival records of the Peaton family. At the Rhode Island Historical Society, she met with genealogist Marcus Thompson, a man whose knowledge of Newport's leading families during the early 20th century was unrivaled. Pulling boxes of files filled with society columns, financial ledgers, and brittle newspaper clippings, Marcus confirmed the Peatons' prominence. Charles Peaton was a key player in wartime manufacturing steel for ships, weapons, munitions. He was indispensable to the war economy. Eleanor, meanwhile, wasn't just his wife. She was a force in her own right, running charity drives, hosting high society galas, lending her face and name to the cause. Catherine laid the enhanced photograph before him, pointing to the swollen glove and concealed bandages. Marcus adjusted his glasses, studying the image with growing fascination. This is extraordinary. I've gone through a lot of their records from 1917, and I've always found certain gaps in their social calendar puzzling, especially around Christmas. They were ever present in society, yet during that winter, their public appearances abruptly stopped. From a stack of papers, he withdrew several yellowed clippings from the Newport Daily News, his finger pressing to a date near the end of December. Here, he said, his tone sharpening. This is where it gets interesting. All through 1917, Eleanor Peaton's name appeared constantly in the society pages, noted for attending luncheons, hosting musicales, and presiding over glittering fundraisers. Yet, in December of that year, her presence seemed to vanish. There were no reports of her hosting Christmas parties, no columns describing her elegant gowns, and no mention of the usual seasonal gatherings at the Peaton mansion. Marcus tapped his files thoughtfully before producing another telling piece of evidence, a guest list for the prestigious heir's New Year's Eve ball. Eleanor Peaton was listed as an expected attendee, he explained. But at the last moment, the family sent their regrets, citing her temporary indisposition. Catherine frowned. What indisposition? Marcus shrugged. That's just it, there's no explanation. Normally, if an illness kept someone away, there would be whispers of influenza or exhaustion. But here nothing. Just silence. From another folder, Marcus produced a shipping manifest from Charles Peaton's business empire. This might tie in. In late November 1917, there was a serious accident at one of his steel foundries. Workers were badly hurt, and equipment was destroyed. Charles himself rushed to the site. Catherine's breath caught. Marcus, are you suggesting Eleanor may have been there too? The possibility hung heavy between them. Determined to find the truth, Catherine traveled next to the Rhode Island Department of Labor archives, where rows of boxes preserved the grim record of industrial mishaps from the wartime years. Archivist David Kim, a specialist in early 20th century workplace safety, welcomed her with practiced efficiency. Accidents were tragically common during World War I, he explained, pulling out the relevant file. With production demands at an all-time high, safety protocols were often neglected. Together, they examined the report dated November 28, 1917. Its details were sobering. An explosion in the main furnace had torn through the facility, injuring 6 workers and causing extensive structural damage. More shocking still, the report noted that several members of the Peton family had been present to inspect new machinery that very day. David pointed to a section scrawled in official handwriting. Here it records that Mrs. Charles Peton was injured and taken to Newport Hospital for treatment. Catherine leaned closer, her pulse quickening as she read. But then there's this addendum, David added, tapping a line written later. At the family's request, all medical records were sealed for confidentiality. Catherine's mind raced. What kind of injuries? David shook his head. The report is vague, but it notes that the explosion scattered molten metal and sharp fragments across the inspection area. Anyone in the blast zone could have suffered severe lacerations, burns, or worse. From another set of archives, he retrieved hospital admission records. Here's confirmation. Mrs. Peton was admitted to Newport Hospital on November 28, 1917, and remained under care for nearly 2 weeks. No details of the treatment, of course. But the length of her stay suggests something serious. Quite a long stay for that era, unless the injuries were truly severe, Catherine remarked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and unease. Yet she was well enough to sit for a formal family portrait by Christmas. David nodded slowly. Apparently so. But as your photograph suggests, she may have gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal the true extent of what she had suffered. He hesitated, then added, "There's one more detail worth noting." The accident report states that Mrs. Peton had been wearing her wedding ring and several other pieces of jewelry at the time of the explosion. The attending physicians recorded significant difficulty in removing these items due to what they termed complications. Catherine stiffened. Complications? What kind? David met her gaze with a grim expression. The kind that would require invasive surgery and leave permanent damage to the hand and wrist. With Dr. Rodriguez's assistance, Catherine secured rare access to the sealed medical archives of Newport Hospital, there in the dim climate-controlled storage of restricted files. They were met by Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief medical historian. Medical privacy is always delicate in historical cases, Dr. Chen explained as she carefully unwrapped a leather-bound file. But since the patient has long been deceased and your research has clear historical merit, these records may be examined. Inside lay the truth that the family had worked so hard to bury. Eleanor Peton's medical notes from late November and December of 1917 revealed the full brutality of the explosion's toll. Metal fragments had torn into her left hand and wrist, destroying tissue and shattering bone. Several fingers were severely compromised. Reading directly from the surgeon's script, Dr. Chen's voice carried a quiet gravity. The patient's wedding ring was forced deep into the flesh of her finger by the blast, creating catastrophic damage. Emergency surgery was required to extract it. Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine. The surgical records described a painstaking effort, removing embedded shrapnel, closing deep lacerations, and addressing the mangled remains of her ring finger. In the end, the damage proved beyond saving, and the digit was amputated. Yet even amid such trauma, the notes revealed Eleanor's obsession with appearance. The patient repeatedly insisted her injuries be kept confidential, Dr. Chen read, and requested immediate measures to preserve her social image. The solution was as chilling as it was ingenious. Hospital records included detailed sketches and instructions for a custom prosthetic finger crafted by a specialist artisan to mimic the natural form and worn discreetly beneath gloves. Eleanor demanded absolute secrecy, decreeing that no one outside the immediate family should ever know. The final medical entry, dated December 1917, confirmed her determination. With the prosthetic device, skillful bandaging, and careful styling, Eleanor could maintain the illusion of wholeness. To casual acquaintances, she would appear untouched by misfortune. But as Catherine stared once more at the enhanced family portrait, she understood what the surgeon could not have anticipated. The stiffness in Eleanor's posture, the unnatural positioning of her hand, the glove stretched just a little too tightly, all were subtle but undeniable traces of a hidden truth. A carefully guarded secret preserved behind velvet gowns and white gloves. The bulkiness of Eleanor's glove, Catherine realized, suggested that even with the finely crafted prosthetic concealing her injury, required additional padding or bandaging to protect the fragile surgical site. Dr. Chen confirmed this with a solemn nod. The portrait was taken less than a month after her discharge. Healing would have still been underway. She likely needed layers of protection beneath the glove to prevent infection or strain. With this in mind, Catherine returned to the Newport Historical Society to better understand not just the physical reality of Eleanor's injury, but the crushing social expectations that had compelled her to hide it. There she met with Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a historian specializing in women's roles in early 20th century high society. Sitting in the quiet of the research library, Dr. Hoffman leaned across the table. To understand Eleanor's decision, you must understand the world she lived in. For women of her class, appearance was more than vanity, it was survival. Wealthy women were expected to embody refinement, perfection, and grace at all times. Any visible imperfection risked not only personal humiliation, but also reputational damage to the family. She produced a series of books and faded periodicals documenting Newport society during the war years. Catherine scanned the photographs, women in immaculate gowns, faces serene, hands prominently displayed in elegant poses. Look closely at the hands, Dr. Hoffman urged. They were considered vital symbols of refinement, proof that a woman was untouched by manual labor. Society magazines of the time were relentless in promoting this image. She retrieved a 1918 issue of a fashionable society journal, opening to an article titled, "The Art of Gracious Living." There, in neat typeset, was a line that made Catherine pause. "A lady's hands should remain pristine, free from blemish, for they are the truest reflection of her breeding and her worth." Catherine frowned. But surely people would have shown understanding if she had been injured in an industrial accident? Dr. Hoffman shook her head. "You'd think so, but society was merciless. A physical disability wasn't viewed with sympathy. It was interpreted as a moral flaw, a weakness. For Eleanor, losing a finger, and particularly her ring finger, would not only have been a personal blow, but a public stigma. She risked being whispered about, pitied, even ostracized. And there was more at stake than her own dignity. Her husband's steel company depended on contracts, business partnerships, and the perception of strength. If Eleanor appeared damaged, that perception could falter, and so might the family's influence. The implications were staggering. Catherine began to see the Christmas portrait in a new light. It wasn't just a family memento, it was a statement of defiance, a carefully staged performance meant to assure Newport society that the Petons remained unbroken, polished and intact. The glove, the prosthetic, the regal posture, all were part of a calculated illusion. Dr. Hoffman's conclusion was unflinching. The portrait was almost certainly meant as reassurance. A message that Eleanor had recovered fully, that the family had endured the crisis and emerged untouched. But your enhanced photograph reveals the truth that beneath the polished exterior, the scars of that November explosion were still very much present. Driven by this revelation, Catherine turned her attention to the history of prosthetics and medical devices in early 20th century America, determined to uncover just how far Eleanor and her doctors had gone in the effort to preserve an image of perfection. At Brown University's Medical History Archives, Catherine was introduced to Dr. Robert Martinez, a scholar who had written extensively about the evolution of prosthetic devices during the Great War. World War I changed everything, he explained, laying out photographs and medical documents across a long oak table. Advances in battlefield medicine meant soldiers were surviving wounds that would have killed them in earlier wars. But survival often meant living with permanent disability, and so the demand for prosthetic solutions skyrocketed. He handed Catherine a fragile catalog published in 1917 by the American Prosthetic Company. Its pages were filled with advertisements not just for replacement limbs, but for what they described as invisible solutions. Devices designed specifically to conceal disability rather than draw attention to it. There was immense social stigma surrounding prosthetics, Dr. Martinez said. The goal wasn't simply to restore function. It was to preserve dignity, to maintain appearances. Among the illustrations were several prosthetic fingers marketed to women of means. These were remarkably advanced for their time, he continued. Custom carved to match the surviving fingers, sometimes from ivory or treated wood, and colored to blend with natural skin tone. The most expensive models even had tiny mechanical joints to allow basic movement. When paired with gloves, they could be almost undetectable. Catherine leaned in, studying the delicate sketches. So how would one of these have been made in 1917? It was a meticulous process. Dr. Martinez replied, pulling out a case study. Multiple fittings adjustments, sometimes weeks of work. The artisans were closer to jewelers than surgeons. Look here, this photograph is from 1918. The woman is wearing a prosthetic finger. Notice the glove. Catherine looked carefully. The glove was elegant, but unnaturally stiff, the fingers more rigid than a true hand would allow. Dr. Martinez tapped the image. Do you see? That stiffness is exactly what you noticed in Eleanor Piton's portrait. The glove had to be slightly larger, more structured to accommodate both the prosthetic and the protective padding around it. From a folder marked Invoices, Dr. Martinez produced one last artifact, a bill from 1917, issued by a Boston craftsman who specialized in what he boldly called society solutions. The cost was staggering, the equivalent of several $1,000s today. But for families like the Pitons, he said the price was secondary. The ability to maintain appearances, to prevent scandal or whispered pity, that was priceless. Eager to see whether Eleanor herself had left any trace of this struggle, Catherine turned to the Redwood Library in Newport, where she discovered that Eleanor's daughter, Margaret Piton Collins, had donated a trove of family papers in the 1960s. With the assistance of librarian James Morrison, she was guided into a quiet archive filled with boxes of correspondence diaries and personal photographs that had never been made public. For the first time, Catherine stood on the threshold of Eleanor Piton's private world, where the carefully constructed image of perfection might finally give way to the raw truth of her hidden ordeal. The Collins donation proved to be remarkably thorough, James explained, as he carefully retrieved several archival boxes from climate-controlled storage. Margaret Piton Collins had evidently wished to preserve her mother's legacy in its entirety. But she also left strict instructions that certain documents remain sealed until the year 2000 in order to protect the family's privacy. Within those long-hidden files, Catherine found Eleanor Piton's private diary entries from the winter of 1917, written in a hand that was precise, yet trembled slightly on the page. They offered a raw and intimate glimpse into her thoughts during the weeks following the foundry explosion. One entry dated December 15th revealed her inner torment. The prosthetic device is still uncomfortable, and I must take care to position my hand naturally. Charles insists that no one must ever learn of the accident. Too much depends on preserving the family's reputation. Catherine read aloud, her voice subdued by the weight of the words. Another entry from December 22nd, written the night before the famous family portrait, carried the tone of desperate resolve. We are to sit for the Christmas photograph tomorrow. The photographer has been sworn to secrecy should he notice any irregularity. I pray the gloves and careful arrangement will be enough to sustain the illusion. Among the papers, Catherine also uncovered a poignant letter Eleanor had written to her sister in California, confiding, "You cannot imagine the constant vigilance required to hide this affliction. Every gathering, every appearance demands meticulous planning. At times I feel as though I am living a lie. Yet Charles is right. Too much depends upon the maintenance of appearances." The most revealing document of all was a letter Eleanor wrote years later in 1925 to her daughter Margaret. In it, she reflected not only on the accident, but on the burden of secrecy. "My dearest child, I hope you will one day understand why we chose to conceal the truth of my injury. In our world, perception is everything. A single careless revelation could have ruined not only my place in society, but your father's business and your own future. The Christmas portrait has become a symbol to me, proof that our family could project strength and perfection, even when scarred by misfortune. And yet I sometimes wonder whether the cost of these illusions is too great, for it weighs heavily upon the soul." Armed with this extraordinary evidence, Catherine arranged a formal presentation before the Newport Historical Society Board. In the Society's grand conference room, with Dr. Rodriguez Marcus Thompson and several other historians gathered, she laid out the fruits of her investigation. First, she displayed the digitally enhanced portrait, its clarity exposing the unnatural bulk and shape of Eleanor's gloved left hand. Then methodically, she walked the group through each discovery: the foundry accident report, the hospital records, the documentation of early prosthetic devices, and finally, Eleanor's own words from her diaries and letters. "What we are seeing here," Catherine concluded, her voice steady, "is not merely a family portrait, but a deliberate act of theater. A tableau designed to conceal injury, preserve dignity, and maintain the fragile currency of social standing. Eleanor Piton, grievously injured in a wartime industrial explosion, lost her ring finger, yet went to extraordinary lengths to ensure no one beyond her family ever knew. This portrait, once thought to be a simple image of festive prosperity, is in fact a mask, one that tells us as much about the brutal expectations of society as it does about Eleanor herself." The Christmas 1917 portrait, Catherine explained to the board, had not been taken simply as a family keepsake, but as a calculated statement, a demonstration to Newport society that Eleanor Piton had fully recovered, even though in reality she was still grappling with the physical pain and emotional burden of her injury, Dr. Rodriguez followed with her analysis of the photographic evidence, pointing out that the digital enhancements revealed not only the carefully crafted prosthetic finger, but also the substantial padding and bandaging Eleanor still relied upon. These hidden supports, she explained, were necessary to protect the fragile surgical site and to give the glove enough structure to disguise what lay beneath. Marcus Thompson then provided the broader historical perspective. This case illustrates with stark clarity the suffocating social pressures placed upon women of Eleanor's class, he said. To admit to disability or disfigurement would not only have risked her personal reputation, but could have inflicted lasting damage on her husband's business interests and the family's social standing. She was in effect trapped by the very privilege that gave her status. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the board's chair, broke the silence. This discovery transforms how we interpret the photograph. What seemed to be a conventional portrait of wealth and refinement is now a deeply poignant artifact of one woman's hidden struggle caught between loyalty to her family, the demands of society, and her own unspoken suffering. Catherine closed her presentation with a reflection on Eleanor's enduring secret. Despite her trauma, Eleanor carried on with flawless composure for the rest of her life, hosting glittering charity events, attending society functions, and maintaining her reputation for 3 more decades. The prosthetic device and her carefully orchestrated public image shielded her private reality, ensuring that the truth never reached beyond her family circle. This portrait, Catherine said softly, reminds us that every carefully posed image tells 2 stories. The polished one intended for the world, and the hidden truth concealed just beneath the surface. 6 months later, the Peaton family portrait became the centerpiece of a groundbreaking exhibition at the Newport Historical Society titled Hidden Stories: What Family Photographs Don't Show. With Catherine and Dr. Rodriguez working alongside the curatorial team, the exhibit brought Eleanor's private ordeal into the light, honoring her resilience, while also exploring the wider themes of disability, gender, and social expectations in early 20th century America. Visitors gazed upon the portrait with new understanding, aware now that behind the elegant smiles and glittering decorations lay a narrative of sacrifice, secrecy, and the heavy price of perfection. The exhibition unveiled the Peaton family's Christmas portrait in 2 forms. The original print, as Newport Society had once admired it, and the digitally enhanced version that revealed the carefully concealed reality beneath Eleanor's pristine white glove. Side by side, the images invited visitors to witness both the illusion Eleanor had fought to maintain and the private suffering hidden beneath her composed exterior. Display cases nearby held her diary entries and letters released with permission from her estate, which gave voice to her deepest fears, her determination to uphold appearances, and her private reflections on the cost of secrecy. A dedicated section of the gallery explored the history of prosthetic devices and the social stigma surrounding disability during Eleanor's lifetime. With contributions from Dr. Robert Martinez at Brown University, several authentic early 20th century prosthetic devices were loaned for display, their craftsmanship as intricate as their purpose was poignant. Informational panels traced how prosthetic design advanced in response to the Great War, and how society's attitudes toward disability, once steeped in silence and shame, have gradually shifted toward openness and acceptance. Catherine and the exhibition team also included narratives from other Newport families who had faced similar dilemmas, showing that Eleanor's ordeal was not an isolated case, but part of a larger pattern in which wealthy families struggled to balance personal hardship with public reputation. Perhaps the most haunting artifact was Eleanor's own prosthetic finger discovered among her effects. Carved from ivory and painstakingly fashioned to resemble her natural hand, it was a work of artistry and secrecy, a reminder of the extraordinary measures she took to preserve the image of perfection. Equally important was the educational programming Catherine developed in partnership with local disability rights advocates. Interactive displays and talks highlighted how far social understanding of disability has come, and how stories like Eleanor's still resonate in a world where stigma has not entirely vanished. By weaving past and present together, the exhibition encouraged visitors to reflect not only on Eleanor's experience, but on broader questions of dignity, resilience, and the courage it takes to live authentically in the face of judgment. On opening night, Catherine stood before the portrait, seeing it anew. Once a symbol of polished prosperity, the image now told a deeper truth. The tale of a woman who bore both injury and expectation with quiet fortitude. Eleanor's white glove, once meant to disguise weakness, had become a symbol of resilience and sacrifice, embodying the hidden battles women of her generation were often forced to fight. More than a century later, the portrait had finally yielded its secret not as a scandal, but as an inspiration. Eleanor Peyton's story, long buried beneath layers of silence, would endure as a reminder that strength is often found not in what we reveal, but in what we endure in silence.